want to thank Sister Comrade Dr. Aisha Fields for that introduction, and all of you for coming out. And I'd just like to start by uniting with the warm welcome to Comrade Sister Carr. We, for a while, thought she was not going to be able to make it here from Egypt, and are so pleased that she went through all kinds of struggles, overcame all kinds of problems that military dictatorship that has been imposed on the people of Egypt by efforts of the United States, and in particular the United States, has given that military more than $3 billion every year for the exact purpose of oppressing and persecuting the people of Egypt. You take the fact that the parasitic, illegitimate white settler state of Israel, that is a stake in the heart of the Arab people, can not only be there undeterred by any efforts coming from Egypt, but also experiences collaboration, open, naked, horrible collaboration with the Egyptian regime. It's a statement of what it is that we're looking at with that regime. And Sister Carr, she had to go through all kinds of things because of the new restrictions that the regime has placed on the ability of people to leave. And she said it. She indicated she was going to be here for the duration, for the whole period. And then she indicated that the regime had changed the rules, as these regimes will do. And but she was going to try to make it anyway, and she did. And she was there every day or every other day, struggling to be able to get the visa to get here. She's here. Uhuru. And I want to say that I truly recognize that Sister Carr and her stance is representative of the stance of everyone who, these best sons and daughters of Africa, who made it a point to come here for this intensive. Comrade Fenty, who is one of the co-MCs of this meeting, was faced with similar difficulties that blocked him from, there's a process that they have for people coming from Africa. If you're coming from Africa and you have a stop in more than one country, well, for Africans, they require that you have a visa for each country that you're going to stop in, even if you're just changing airplanes, which is what Fenty was doing. It's because of the horrible assumption by these white countries that any African who's coming through is going to want to stay there and not go back home. And what it clearly reveals to us is that Europe, the whole white world, only wants Africans to come to Europe and come to the Americas and other places in chains, because they didn't require visas when they snatched us up and brought us here. But all over the continent of Africa, we find that these governments require African people to stand in the hot sun or rain for much of the day to be able to get to a U.S. consulate, and then have to pay enormous sums of money, sometimes equal to 3 months more of wages, to get to see somebody in the consulate, and then often, after seeing the person, not being able to come to get a visa to come to this country, which means they've lost their money, they've lost their time, and in many ways, an aspect of their dignity having to go through this. This is especially true when you recognize that white people don't need visas, generally speaking, to go into Africa. White people can land on the continent of Africa and go there and show ID or show a couple of dollars or what have you, and travel on our continent without any difficulties at all. It's an insulting situation, one that should enrage African people all around the world. And in addition to the difficulties of Comrade Fenty and Carr, one brother who tried to get out of Sierra Leone, they had come back, I think, 3 times. And Comrade Brother Issa, and then they had him filed for an application on 2 different occasions, and he had to pay them twice to be denied. And this is just, how it works for us. But these are incredible Africans who made the determination to be here, and some who wanted to come who couldn't get here. And I just can't tell you how pleased I am to see this advance in the struggle of African people. We've gone through so many struggles, and I think one of the high points of our struggles was in the 1960s, where magnificent leaders arose, not as a relatively isolated situation as we had with Thomas Sankara, which was relatively isolated in the sense that it was not that high tide of resistance that produced in Nkrumah, or produced out of Ghana, or Dedan Kimati, who even preceded Nkrumah, out of Kenya, who led the entity that they call Mau Mau, or Patrice Lumumba, and various other forces. This was a high tide of resistance when the eyes of the world was on Africa and African people, when Africans wanted to be Africans, when Africans were shedding this image that had been imposed on Africa, or rejecting it with Tarzan and the rest of it, when Africans moved away from the notion that I can't be an African because my grandmother was an Indian or a Puerto Rican and all this other kind of nonsense that's been imposed on us. Africans wanted to be Africans, and then other people wanted to be Africans or wanted to be associated with Africa so they could see the future that was being made by black people. And it excited African people all around the world. And that revolution was defeated. On various continents it was defeated. Murder and mayhem in this country resulted in some deaths of people who we are quite aware of, like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King, like Bobby Hutton, like young Bobby Hutton, like Fred Hampton, like Carl Hampton, and several others. And then the mass arrests that occurred, the terror during that period of time, where even a meeting like this was perceived as a threat, and it was not unusual for them to be attacked by policemen with guns drawn, even if there were children in the meeting, where they would attack our centers and they destroy the food that we had prepared to feed our children, because they did not want the notion of African people taking care of our own children, especially with the intent of having our own freedom on our own terms, free from America. So they would do these things. They would soil our newspapers. They would destroy them, or they would create false newspapers to give people the impression that we printed them, and then that said horrible things that would frighten parents and about the safety of their children and things like this. This was counterinsurgency, by the way. And they did all these things and destroyed the revolutionary movement. And in addition to destroying the movement, they created in our communities these false leaders. They created new standards of what revolutionary movement or progress for Africans should be like. I remember in the 1960s a magazine that was clearly associated at the time with the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA. It was called U.S. News and World Report. I don't know if it's still associated with the CIA, but if it's like the rest of the media, I assume it is. Where they did not have Africans working with them or for them. They did a poll of African people, and throughout this country, and 10% of the African population in the United States declared themselves revolutionary. That was a hell of an outcome. 10% of the African population, and this is a poll that was done by white people at a time of white domination, and yet 10% of the population said that they were revolutionaries. That's how they characterized themselves. So it was a statement of the difficulties that this establishment, this setup, this social system that rests upon so many graves, rests upon so much bloodshed, that so much history stolen from our people, so much culture that's been trampled upon. This system faced a horrible threat of resistance and willingness of African people to be free, and that was destroyed. And after having destroyed that, they put in its place, instead of Dedan Kimathi, who was a revolutionary in Kenya, who was a leader of the Mau Mau, as they call it, the Kenyan Land Freedom Army, they gave us Jomo Kenyatta. Instead of Malcolm X, they gave us Louis Farrakhan. Instead of Martin Luther King, they gave us Jesse Jackson. They gave us all of these charlatans, all of these people who have nothing to do with revolution and who would have African people move in directions that's contrary to our best interests. So now what we are doing, we're even solving some problems that existed during that time, in the sense that even though we had revolutionary organization and fantastic leaders in Ghana and in Congo and in Mali and in various other places, in Guinea and various other places, we did not have a united revolutionary effort, a united revolutionary organization working from a common trajectory. And that was a difficulty that we had. So they could defeat us in one place and we were defeated. They can crush us in Kenya and we were defeated. There was no revolutionary movement there. They could crush us in Ghana. They could overthrow Nkrumah and we were defeated. They could kill Lumumba and we were defeated. But what we have done now with the African Socialist International is create an international organization that's connected to each other, that gives us the ability to have a strategic approach to our struggle no matter where we are located, whether it's in Stockholm, whether it's in Oslo in Norway, whether it's in California, or West Africa, or Egypt. We have a single organization, which means that if we are hurt in a place like Egypt, or in a place like Kenya, then we have cadre in various places around the world who can go into those areas and can contribute in some way to the survival of that front of our revolutionary movement, wherever it's located. And this process that we're engaged in now is a process that's going to help us develop and prepare a cadre that's willing to do whatever is necessary in order to see our Africa free, in order to say that our children will have a future, regardless of what the intentions of America or any other social system in the world. We will determine our children will have a future, and we have identified African people from around the world, and more of them are being involved, such as in South Africa and various other places. We have identified these people who are willing to do what's necessary to unite, to free our people, so that we don't have to live with the kind of humiliation, poverty, starvation, even as forces who are rich as a consequence of stealing everything that is the birthright of black people all around the world. So I want to salute all of you and just state just how much I recognize and appreciate your significance for coming and participating in this cadre intensive that's to last for the entire month. On today, and what that has meant is that we have been involved in serious study every day, serious study and training. When I say study and training, I mean we're dealing with the most complex theoretical questions. We're dealing with the most serious political questions, but we're also doing training so that we know how to do things. Simple things, it may appear, but like conduct a meeting, how to make a presentation, because the main task that we're involved in is communicating with African people. So, and organizing African people. So in order to organize, you have to be able to conduct a meeting to get the outcome that we're looking for. In order to communicate with African people, you got to know how to make a presentation. We talk about taking out our newspaper, the burning spear, because we're in a contest of ideas with an oppressor that controls an extraordinarily sophisticated, powerful instrument of disinformation that spreads it all around the world, helping to have people come to conclusions that meet their objectives as opposed to our objectives and the objectives of the oppressed peoples around the world. So we got Africans here, grown men and women, who will pick up a newspaper and will spend time going door to door, who will pick up a newspaper and stand on corners and at supermarkets and things like that and say, brother, I want to talk to you. This is something that you need to know about. And I'm here to help you become a part of the greatest revolutionary movement that has ever existed on the face of the earth that will guarantee the freedom of our people. That's the kind of thing that we're doing. So I'm to talk to you about counterinsurgency as a part of the studies that we're doing. And this is an important study because we've talked about the question of the state during this process, the state, which is an instrument of coercion that has come into existence at that point in time and place in history where societies were divided between the haves and the have-nots, and where those who have generally have it as a consequence of taking stuff from those who don't have. Nobody's going to willingly put up with that. Nobody's going to willingly live as a slave, working all day, creating stuff so that white people can be comfortable in fact. In order for that to work, then you've got to have an instrument, an organization of coercion to force people to do what you want them to do. Nobody's going to be in Congo and go out and harvest rubber so that white people in Belgium or any place else can have rubber for their tires and for their footballs and other things. You can't make people do that unless you use the worst kind of coercion, like cutting off their hands, like cutting off their ears, that maiming them, that kidnapping their children, that murdering people. This is how you make it happen. So this is what we're talking about in terms of state power. If you have a society that's split, and that it is split between the haves and the have-nots, and the basis of that split is the fact that somebody who's got it has got it as a consequence of taking it from somebody else, then you got to have the police, you got to have the army, you got to have courts and police, and all of those instruments are there to maintain, to support the status quo. So that those who got can continue to have, and those from whom it is stolen continues to supply what it is that they need, right? That's the state that we are talking about. And it's the state, it is this instrument, more than anything else. I know in our communities, we've heard this silly story that I hear supposedly learned people repeating over and over again, that suggests that somehow African people are oppressed because a white man in 1700 and something came to America and told them that I want to teach you how to keep your black people oppressed and controlled, and we've come up with this method, and his name was supposed to have been Willie Lynch. And the Willie Lynch syndrome, as we've called it, and this white man was supposed to have laid out these means by which you can keep black people divided and separated and etc. and control them. Well, any African who lives in the real world, on the ground, in African communities, know that it's no letter or plan that some white man named Willie Lynch put together that keeps us oppressed. Because if it were that easy, then we wouldn't have police on every corner in the African community. If it were that easy, they wouldn't have to use the police. They wouldn't have a mass incarceration of African people like you look at every day. If it were that easy, then that brother would not have died in New York, who they just choked to death, etc. But the reality is that they need weapons of terror to maintain the status quo, and no letter, no Willie Lynch, nothing like that could be responsible for it. So we're going to talk about how some of the methods that they use to maintain the status quo, to keep oppressed people oppressed, to keep us from rising up, to keep us from struggling for a future for our children, for the dignity of our people, our nation, from being able to unite. But I think that before going into this discussion, especially as we understand that this discussion is being live streamed so that people from all around the world are watching us, that we must necessarily say something about this murder that's happening in broad daylight, a lynching using the most sophisticated weaponry that has been developed, that's happening in this place called Gaza Strip. That's in Palestine. That's happening in occupied Palestine. I think that we have to say something about that. I think we have to make a statement that it is intolerable, that it is unacceptable. Even in the face of this great support. I just heard Hillary Clinton, and I heard John Kerry, and I heard Barack Hussein Obama talking about how we respect Israel's right to defend itself. And so it's defending itself with the kinds of bombs. You may have seen some of the pictures of children, of babies whose heads have been shattered and skulls ripped apart and the rest of that. We're talking about this place that they call the Gaza Strip, that is occupied Palestine, like the whole territory that they refer to as Israel is occupied Palestine. It is something that came about as a consequence of a movement by a sector of wannabe bourgeoisie, white people who identified as Jews. White people who identified as Jews in the face of what had been recognized as the way, the means by which countries became rich and powerful. In fact, I remember reading this quote from Cecil Rhodes, who was in England, who made the statement that when he walked down the streets and he saw people, mobs in the street of England, in London, talking about we need bread, they were starving and what have you. And he said, that is what convinced me that if we are to survive, we must become imperialists. We must become imperialists. And so this man, Cecil Rhodes, took off. And he went into southern Africa. Rhodesia, what is now Zimbabwe, was named after him. He didn't just go by himself. He invited bands of other white people to join him, and they were able to get land if they would participate in killing Africans. And on one afternoon, they killed more than 5,000 Africans with the particular kinds of machine guns that they introduced to that situation. And then Africa had tea. This is the kind of thing that happened. We talk about Cecil Rhodes. We're talking about when Leopold, King Leopold of Belgium, felt like he was being left behind in Europe while the other Europeans were growing rich. He understood that the way to get rich is to go to Africa and get a colony. So he went to Africa. That's why the Congo was called the Belgian Congo. That's where Rwanda, Burundi, all of these places, the Belgians took that for their own and killed in Congo alone at least 12 million African people. It was understood this is how you get rich. And this group of white people who created this Zionist movement under this fabricated nonsense, and this is what makes it so bad, is because white people who at one time identified Uganda in Africa as the national homeland of Jewish people, right? This group of white people decided that they were going to take this land because they wanted to get rich as well. They were a bourgeoisie from Europe. And they talk about they're doing it in order to, because the Jews have suffered the Holocaust and that it should never happen again. And then to make sure it never happens again, they're going to take this promised land. And it was promised to them by God. God said that they were a chosen people and it's a promised land. The most ridiculous obscenities that you ever want to hear. And it's dangerous too. It's not just dangerous to people who fall victim to it other than Jews. It's dangerous to Jews too, to put yourself in a place that you are not among the human beings, but you got some special relationship that God, that he can give you somebody else's land, somebody else's territory, and you are special people. That the laws of social development do not apply if you're Jewish. And of course, that's what we're looking at. And so this movement developed. And the bourgeoisie, does the bourgeoisie care about anybody but the bourgeoisie and the social system that it represents anywhere? Does the black petty bourgeoisie who is in charge of us in Congo, does he give a damn about the African masses in Congo? Do they care anything, the black petty bourgeoisie? that's working with imperialism in Sierra Leone, do they give a damn about the African people, masses? Nothing at all. And the white bourgeoisie, the Jewish bourgeoisie, doesn't give a damn about Jewish workers and other people. They don't give a damn about them. All they care about is profit and the maintenance of this social system. That's all they care about. That's all they care about. And they will send people. They will send people into these meat grinders, these wars that they create. They will set up situations, send people into meat grinders where people are killing workers, other workers, and dying for them in the name of fighting some national question. And Israel was created in 1948, which means I am older than Israel. And it was created because of the need by this aspiring Jewish bourgeoisie, and also because of the need of white power around the world to be able to control the oil and petroleum resources in that area of the world, and also to maintain the geopolitical strategic interests of Europe and American white power. You with me on that? That's why it was created. They needed, let me tell you why they needed an Israel. And I'm saying this because at the time, they had enough Uncle Tom Arabs, right? They had Uncle Toms in Saudi Arabia. They created Saudi Arabia. There was no such thing as Saudi Arabia. They took this crew of sellout people from this area whose last name was Saud, and then they created this thing, called it Saudi Arabia, named after them, and put a handful of people, and this is what was strategically important for them. They got all this land, vast amount of land, but just a handful of people there, right? And that's really, something that's beneficial because they don't have to come up against a whole bunch of people. That's the theory. But my point is, they have a whole bunch of Uncle Tom Arabs, right? As you can see, while they're standing aside watching the Palestinians being murdered, right, by this illegitimate white nationalist settler state. Whole bunch of Uncle Tom Arabs there. But they needed this entity that we call Israel because they were white people. There were white people who came from Russia, who came from Lithuania, who came from even America. One president, Golda Meir, from Milwaukee. How the hell do you end up being the president of some? You're from Milwaukee. This is what they did to create this entity that they call Israel, right? They needed white people because even if they had Arabs, right, Uncle Tom Arabs, right, the masses are sooner or later going to overthrow the Uncle Toms. And when they overthrow the Uncle Toms, that means they're going to take all the guns and all the weapons and everything that they have been given by the U.S. to work in their own interest, just like they did in Iran. They thought they could get away in Iran because the Iranians are not Arabs either. You know that, don't you? The Iranians are Persians, right? So they're going to play the Persians against the Arabs. They're going to play these white people against the Arabs, and that way they were going to control all of this territory. And so by 1948, so I should tell you that before the state of Israel was founded, Palestine was inhabited by Jews, Christians, and Muslims. It was not just wasn't based on some divisions by religion or anything like. People lived in peace there. The divisions that you see now were created by the imperialists, just like what you see throughout the Middle East now, where people are making war against each other. They created the divisions there. And so they began to bring more and more white people into the area. The Jewish terrorists they created gangs like the Stern Gang, and began bombing mosques and churches like that to drive the Palestinians, the Arabs, out of Palestine. And then they took more and more, and at one point they said, okay, you can have, according to the United Nations, the Jews could have 30% of Palestine, and then the rest was left to everybody else. But it's just like they can never be satisfied with 30%. It's like this land that we stand on now. When white people came to this land, there were so few white people, they could have, all they wanted to do was find a decent place to live. They could have settled in Clearwater, Florida. right? But that wouldn't satisfy them. They wanted to have the whole thing, the entire continent. They took every damn thing and killed everybody that got in their way. And that's the kind of thing that the state of Israel is doing. So they got this population of Palestinian Arabs who are living in what they call the Gaza Strip. The only reason they're in the Gaza Strip, by the way, as they are, is because, first of all, the Palestinian Liberation Organization was a coalition of different kinds of Palestinian groups. The chief was a group called Fatah, which was an Uncle Tom petty bourgeois kind of organization, but it was a militant petty bourgeois kind of organization. It was like the Jesse Jackson of its era with guns. It's like Jesse Jackson with a gun, right? And but there were also other groups who were part of the Palestinian Liberation Organization. There's some genuine revolutionaries were a part of this Palestinian Liberation Organization who wanted to free the Palestinian people. And really who wanted to create a new society in Palestine where everybody could live in Palestine, who wanted to bring power to the workers who produce all the value in Palestine. That was what some of them wanted. But the reactionary Arab regimes gave all the money and support primarily to Fatah of the PLO. The PLO was recognized as a legitimate spokesperson for the Palestinian people. But sooner that the U.S. and the Israelis became dissatisfied with Yasser Arafat. He had a broad base among all the Palestinian people who considered him the father of the Palestinian movement for revolution, for transformation, take back Palestine. Even though he makes deals, he was making deals and what have you. But there were some things that he could not move from. And that's what you have when you have a popular movement. And that's really important to understand, because some people can't understand why Barack Hussein Obama can do the things he does. He can do that because he is not somebody who came from a popular movement among the masses of African people. I mean, Jesse Jackson couldn't get away with what Obama could do. Well, I almost said Al Sharpton, but I don't know, Sharpton is nasty enough. I mean, this guy, he was a snitch with the FBI, even, during the movement for our freedom. But because Jackson comes from a mass movement, a base of popular, so you got to say something. You got to act like you represent black people. But this man, Obama, where the hell did he come from? He didn't represent anybody. He was a creation of white power, white people, no connections to the masses of people that could pressure him or influence him to do anything. And they imposed this person on our community. And the same thing is what Arafat. Arafat has a popular base. He was loved by the Palestinian people. He could not in any way give up the right of return that the Palestinians had. You couldn't say at this time that the Palestinians didn't have a right to come back. That was really important, because what the Jewish state had done was push the majority of the Palestinians out of Palestine and brought all these white people there. So now the Palestinians, the Arabs are not even, the Palestinians are not even majority in their own land. So the demand for the right to return meant that you wouldn't have a majority Jewish white state. You with me on that? So Arafat, that was a tradition in the Palestinian movement. He couldn't give up on that. And there were other kinds of critical questions that Arafat could not retreat from. But so they, first of all, decided, they picked, when I say they, the United States and the state of Israel picked this man Abbas. They wanted him to be, they wanted the PLO and Arafat to change the structure of what they call a Palestinian Authority. This was where the Palestinians were supposed to have their state. They had the right to take out the garbage in the state. They had the right and to police each other, but they could not have weapons or any kind of arms that could fight the Israelis. This, I'm telling you, I'm not making this up. This is how this was a setup that they had, they picked Abbas to be the prime minister. The U.S. and the Israelis picked Abbas, and Arafat went along with it. But even after Abbas was there, they assumed that the prime minister would have the maximum authority in the Palestinian Authority. But it didn't work out that way, because Arafat was the hero to the Palestinian people, so he still ran everything. So what they did was they isolated Arafat. in this compound in Palestine, and they began to bomb. They bombed everything around it except him, except the place where he was. They bombed all around it. I mean, this is where they really did precision bombing, making sure not to kill Arafat, but the idea was to isolate him. They isolated him, and then they poisoned him with some kind of radioactive stuff that they finally admitted to, that they finally discovered. Everybody else knew that he had been poisoned, you know. And when they poisoned him, then Abbas became the leader by default. So then they said, okay, Abbas is a leader, now we're going to have an election. But Abbas is a leader. They had an election, and guess what? Abbas lost the election to Hamas. Hamas won the election. When Hamas won the election, then the Americans and the Jewish state, all of them did everything to starve the people because Hamas won the election. They funded and had Fatah under Abbas to attack militarily Hamas. And Fatah got wiped out, got beat back. And so that's how Hamas ends up in control of the Gaza Strip, and Fatah controls what they call the Western Bank. This is what they did. You must understand this. God, the real estate agent, had nothing to do with this, right? Who gave them this land 2,000 years ago, got nothing to do with this. That's just pure fabrication that people should be ashamed to say in the 21st century. They shouldn't even be saying that kind of nonsense to explain these critical political issues that have the potential of threatening the peace of the world, not just in that region. So I want to say something about that. And I want to say this. There are nearly 2 million people who live in this place that they call the Gaza Strip. The Gaza Strip at its widest area is only 5 miles wide. It is something like 23 miles long. That is to say, it is as large, it is as long as maybe from here to Clearwater. You understand? And 2 million people, it's got more people in it than Philadelphia, right? And they're talking about, they're bombing, using surgical strikes, they call it. They're bombing church, they're bombing mosques, they're bombing hospitals, they disabled centers, they're bombing homes. They murder, nothing but murder that's happening in all of them, and they are being applauded and supported and funded by the United States government and all the other imperialist powers in the world. So this is what we're looking at when we look at what's happening in Gaza. There is no mystery there. There is no end, but the 3 white boys who they say got killed, I don't know if 3 white boys got killed or not, but if they did, you have to understand this in the context of the history of that relationship. The Palestinians want their land back, and they have conceded. They just say, well, just give us 30%. We'll take 30%, which is backwards in my view. So they aren't even demanding the whole thing. And so the people want their land. Every week you find a new situation where the white settlers would take more land, set up new settlements and what have you. So here's somebody who's lived here all their lives. Their family have olive orchards and things like that, and then they wake up and then there's a bulldozer that's coming to destroy their homes and take all of their resources. And you know, there was no word. Did you know there was no such word as genocide until when they killed all the people in Congo? There was no word called genocide. When they were eliminating all of the indigenous people in the Americas, there was no word called genocide. When they were enslaving us and perhaps destroyed 100 or 200 million people, there was no word called genocide. Genocide was something that was created by the Zionists. It's the name that was created by the Zionists to explain something that white people were doing to white people. That's why you will even run into resistance. If you say what you're doing to us is genocide, they say don't use that word genocide because of the horrible things that happened to the Jews. You can't say genocide. Are you out of your mind? And I want to make this point and move away from this subject. That the Holocaust, as it's characterized, is an ideological weapon that's being used against the oppressed peoples of the world. So that the worst thing that has happened in human history is not the 12 million Africans who were killed in Congo by the Belgians, or the 100 or 200 million Africans who died on the way from Africa here, or the disappearance of the indigenous people who are now, some of whom are now in concentration camps that they call Indian reservations. These were not the worst things that happened in human history. It was what white people did to white people that's the worst thing. And guess what? The Palestinians didn't do it. The Palestinians didn't do it. And if you want to justify taking land from somebody to give it to the Jews, it seems to me you look at Frankfurt or Berlin, Germany, because those are the ones who did it to the Jews. So, you know, I just think we got to take all of this nonsense out. And you can't say anything about it, because if you say something about it, you are anti-Semitic. No, I'm an anti-terrorist. You know, that's what I am. I'm an anti-capitalist. I'm an anti-imperialist. That's what I am. And you can't wave some flag, some religious flag in my face and then tell me that it's all right to murder innocent people like that and take their land and resources. Hell no, won't work anymore. And those of us who are here have to take that stance. And then just say, well, God gave them to them 2,000 years ago. You was, damn, I hope God never comes to my neighborhood. Uhuru. Uhuru. So I just think that we don't play that. Let them have that discussion with somebody else. Don't you call me what you want to call me. Call me an anti-Semite. Here, you done put me in slavery. You done colonized my people. And all of this stuff you've done to us, and you got a museum, a Holocaust museum for people who might have been oppressed and killed, but not here. The ones who were oppressed and killed here are Africans, the Indians, the Mexicans, and what have you. I don't even want to hear that. I don't even want to hear that. So, if I'm an anti-Semite because I'm opposed to the oppression of the Palestinian people that's been done by the illegitimate white nationalist state of Israel, then what are those who would put up that museum there on the bloody ground of the indigenous people and that enslavement of Africans? What are they? You see. So I wanted to say that. And one other thing I want to mention. That is this thing that's happening in Ukraine. I'm mentioning Palestine. I'm talking about Ukraine. You can't run away from it. You see it on the newspaper, in the television. It's everywhere. So you have to know it's there. But you also have to know how it relates to us. Right? Just to see that, how the hell does it relate to us? Is, well, one thing, it relates to us because we're talking about confrontations that could obliterate the entire earth. That's what we're talking. We're talking about confrontations that could lead to nuclear conflagration that can destroy everything on the planet. That's one way. Another reason that it applies to us, is significant to us, is because we have not lost our humanity. Barack Obama does not reflect the humanity of African people. We do not believe in assassination, drones, and murder and the kind of thing that Obama is engaged in. We are different people in that. That's not who Africans are. That's what I want to say. And then the other thing is this. The process that created this world that we live in today, Apple computers, paved streets in America and Amsterdam and all of those places, the process that created that and created the starvation and poverty of Africans in the vast majority of the world. This is what is being challenged today. The world economy that we live in today was created by slavery, by slaving our mamas and daddies and our people. That's how the system came to being. It could not have existed otherwise. This system that we're talking about, how many Indians died to make this land happen? And how many are stuck on reservations today with a lifespan in the 40s right now, in the 21st century? That's how this system got to be here. Not just us, but the wars they made against China in the 19th century, 1841-42, the so-called Opium War, turned China into a nation of junkies. That they held Vietnam, the French, under French colonialism as a drug colony. You know, the Haiti, all of these things like that. This is what built this system. And that's why we live in a world where 80% of the people on the planet Earth try to survive off less than $10 US a day. 50% of the people on the planet Earth try to survive off less than $3 US a day. And if you're in Africa, you're lucky if you get $1 a day. That's the reality that we live in as a consequence of how this world came to being. Wasn't Jesus came and said, let's give the white people everything? It didn't work like that. It's slavery and colonialism that created this world. And now what we see happening in the world is that oppressed peoples everywhere are taking back their resources, their lands. Whether it's in Venezuela, where there was a Hugo Chavez that they hated, remember that? Whether it's in Ecuador and all the other places throughout South America that they used to brag about it being America's backyard. Whether it's in Asia, China, that they used to be able to dominate, etc. People are taking back their resources. You want to know why there's an economic crisis happening in the world today? You can believe the housing bubble if you want to. The bubble that just got busted was the imperialist colonial bubble. It was the bubble that where you had a situation where all the white world was living through sucking the blood of other people around the world, and people are taking their stuff back. That's why they got a damn problem. And we say that is right on. And what you see with Palestine is a desperate imperialism. And what you see in Ukraine is a changing of the situation where they had begun to encircle Russia. That never had a capitalist society up until recently. They have begun to encircle Russia, putting NATO bases and things like that so they can continue to dominate. They're grabbing everything they can. But the problem was, as one Russian commentator said, that we are the only country that could turn America into a nuclear ash. So they can't push Russia around like they were able to push a lot of other countries around. See? And people can see that. So they got a situation there. They created the Ukrainian crisis. They are the ones who made this coup happen, where a legitimately elected Ukrainian president was overthrown by their influence. And now they had a coup. And now many of the people in eastern Ukraine said, we want to be a part of Russia. We don't want to have anything to do with this. And they voted on it. It's really interesting, because white people tell you that they love democracy so much. Imperialists tell you they love democracy until you vote the wrong way. They love for you to vote as long as you vote the way you want them to vote. But if you're a Palestinian who vote that you want to be free, if you're an African who vote that you want to have freedom from white people, then that vote is illegitimate, something wrong with you. And the same thing is true that happened in Ukraine. So they voted the wrong way when they voted to separate and to join Russia. And now the U.S. begins war talk, bluster. And what that happened in the face of that, Putin was the only one that was sounding diplomatic and statesmanship and reasonable. People in Europe were writing about that, saying that. So what do? You have a Malaysian airplane that they say was shot down. Now that's an interesting situation. And they got all the evidence. They said they got all the evidence that the Malaysian airplane was shot down. Which is really weird, given the fact that they got a history of not being able to find anything with Malaysian airplanes when they go down, right? You remember that? Yeah, been 3 months. They can't tell you the black box, the white box, or anything about that airline that went down before, but now they know for sure. We know for sure. We heard it on the radio, etc. They sound like Marvin Gaye. Heard it on the grapevine, right? That's what happened with it. But here's what you have. You say, okay, well, did the Russian separatists or the Russian separatists shoot down the airplane? Obama said they did. Kerry said they did. You know the other thing they said? They said on the news that we got evidence, or we can prove that there's a likelihood that these were Russian weapons, right? Used by people trained by Russia. They say, we believe that's what happened. Guess what? In Palestine, they got Apache helicopters, right, made by America. All the other weapons, $3 or more billion a year, given to the Israelis to kill Palestinians. You don't have to guess where they got their weapons from. They got them from America. You don't have to guess who trained them to murder Palestinians, but somehow the Russians must have shot down the airplane. Guess what? There are more people who have been killed in Palestine with deliberate bombing and murder than was killed on that airplane just the other day. You know, it's just nonsensical. But the other thing is this. You don't know. I didn't see who did it. only thing I know is about the history of the process. All right? You don't have to know all the stuff, you just know about the history of the process. I'm told that somebody was able to discover that it was really that there are planets out there in the solar system without actually having to see the planet. They just know certain kinds of things about the laws of gravity, right? And they see the one planet, they see it moves in a certain way. They know the only way it can move that way is because it's been affected by the gravitational pull of some other planet out there, even if they can't see it. You understand what I'm saying? You don't have to see everything, but this is what you do know. In whose interest was it for that airplane to go down? Look at the history of the process itself. Is it serving Putin? No, it's not serving Putin or Russia for that airplane to go down. They are now trying to use all of this to discredit Putin because they got a problem with Putin, who's gaining more and more influence, but particularly in Europe. So that even Germany and France and what have you are talking about having economic relations with Russia, a growing Russia, as America improves itself to be impotent in the face of how the world is changing today. So I wasn't there, but I know the history of the process. And I know that when I see that the planet moving a certain way, there's something, that gravitational pull out there that's working on it. And what's working on it is what we would characterize as an uneasy equilibrium. Where there is this contest between the past and the future that's at work, and the past is kicking. The past is in its death throes, and the future is emerging, and the future is a future of a free people, that where America and white power and nobody can bully people around, and people can have the kinds of lives that we deserve. Well, I had to say those things because you can't speak before people who are watching this live stream without dealing with that Palestinian and that Ukrainian nonsense that they're putting. And I want to tell you that it's dangerous, that America is flirting with horrible dangers. It's a statement of just how desperate these white power forces are. Even the attack on Palestine is a statement of desperation, because now this moral high ground, this halo with which the Jewish state was carried in, is protecting itself from these dirty Arabs who got them surrounded, who gonna kill them and everything. None of that doesn't work anymore. More and more people all around the world see this stuff happen. That is desperation. They can't hide behind that anymore. And the moral high ground has been wiped out. They wiped it out themselves with what they're doing in Palestine right now. And what we're looking at Ukraine. Because you're talking about Russia and the United States, the most highly nuclearized countries in the world today. They could set off a conflagration. They don't have to necessarily mean to do it. Look at what the United States, and this is not even in the public equation, how the United States is challenging China in a military fashion in Asia, etc. So-called, remember what Obama was talked about doing now? What did he say he was doing in terms of his military strategy? He called it the Asian pivot to deal with China. You see, and these are the factors, and this is a desperate white power that's got this Negro fronting for it, right? A desperate white power, and I'm saying that the potential for nuclear conflagration is real. Everybody here ought to, and everybody who's listening to this ought to come to Philadelphia August 16th and 17th, where the Black is Black Coalition will be dealing with all of these questions and issues. How much time I got? Oh, I got 10 minutes? Okay. No, I was supposed to have talked about something else. And I sort of preempted that. I thought I had more time than I do, but that's all right. We'll work with this time. The thing I'm supposed to talk about is counterinsurgency. This is the science that has been developed by oppressors to prevent people from winning their freedom. It's a science. It's not, when you see it at work, even what you saw happen in Ukraine was counterinsurgency, where the U.S. would have forces come out and mass demonstrations and what have you, and then set up the terms for a coup that overthrew the legitimate president. You saw that happen in Egypt, where the so-called Muslim Brotherhood had won the election and had begun to make changes that challenged the hegemony of Israel and changed the political context of much of the Middle East. That was happening. And so you saw them initiate what they call some kind of popular movement on the ground that created conditions. They would force a government to respond to these terrorists in the streets, to people who are acting a certain way, and use that as a public explanation for why they need to do something to overturn a legitimate process. That was a legitimately elected Muslim Brotherhood. Morsi was elected by the people of Egypt. And if there was an ability for him to be gotten rid of because of popular demand, all they had to do was wait to the election and get rid of him. But they knew they couldn't get rid of him through an election, and so that's why they did what they did. That was counterinsurgency, creating these kinds of conditions. They call it regime change. They've done it in Syria. They had these sleeper cells in Syria that could rise up and demonstrate, and then they say, well, the Syrians are killing all of these people, therefore we have to arm and do something to get rid of Assad. They did it in Libya. They tried to do it in Iran. They have these demonstrations with these wannabe white people marching in the streets, and then they publicize it, everything, and then say now the Iranian government is illegitimate, and that's the basis for trying to do a regime change, except Iran crushed them as it should. They did it in Venezuela, where they had privileged students and what have you on the streets, while the conditions in Venezuela have changed dramatically. You know, they got more than 20,000 Cuban doctors who are providing free health care for all of the poor people in Venezuela. They never had free health care, never had any kind of health care, and their conditions are better than they've ever been before. But you got these displaced, dispossessed middle class out there who want things to go back to the way they were, and they will hold some demonstrations and disrupt stuff in the streets, and then you'll see it on CNN and all of this as a justification to they're winning mass antagonism toward that government to justify doing the kinds of things they want. That's counterinsurgency. I want to say that we live with counterinsurgency. And counterinsurgency, one of the basic fundamental principles of counterinsurgency is population and resource control. If they can control the population, control the resources, then they can, that's it. And that's what they're working for all the time. And that's what they do in our communities. That's why, you know, at the height, right here, in this city we live in, they did this thing they call, what was it, Hope 6? No. Is it Hope 6 that they brought here? Say it again. It was Hope 6 they brought here. They didn't have a Hope 6 project. What made the Hope 6 project, as they call it, was the rebellion that happened here. They had applied for it, they couldn't get it from this government, and this rebellion that happened here, where masses of African people rose up with such an intensity, they brought a helicopter down out here in the streets and pushed the police out of this community. It was these documents that they sent to the federal government and said, you got to give us Hope 6. What is Hope 6? They call it a program that will disperse poverty in the community. Not get rid of poverty, but disperse it. In other words, niggas can't be living together. You understand? Because once you're together, you're conscious of your own power, you can organize each other, and you can make plans. So they got to disperse poverty, and that was the key to the program. That's how they did Jordan Park. That was supposed to have been for help the people with new apartments and stuff like that, but it was too dense. Too many people living in those situations together that could form a basis of certain kind of resistance in the defense of our people and in the promotion of a free black people, Uhuru. You should look at the student's guide in the study. Those of you in the intensive, I didn't use it and was only able just to say a little bit, nothing at all, really. But I felt like it was absolutely necessary to address this situation in Palestine and this warmongering that we see revolving around Ukraine and the airplane that they were able, the Malaysian airplane that they were able to find with a horrible track record of dealing with Malaysian Airlines up to now. Uhuru. I want to show you this, that counterinsurgency is not a little thing. This is a special warfare area handbook for Guinea. For Guinea. It was done in 1961. And I just want to show you that this is a science. They work on this all the time. They were not at war with Guinea in 1961. Special warfare area handbook for Guinea. Prepared by Foreign Affairs Studies Division, Special Operations Research Office, the American University, Washington, 16 D.C., operating under contract with the Department of the Army, December 1961. This is the same year they killed Lumumba, wasn't it? 61. And this is what they say. This is the general forward that I just want to introduce you to. Talk about counterinsurgency. Here's what they say. This is done, again, by American University. Planning for psychological operations and unconventional warfare requires an understanding of the likes, dislikes, attitudes, and human strengths and weaknesses of target groups. This area handbook presents sociological, economic, political, and military background information essential to such understanding. Encyclopedic information available from other sources is included only to the extent that it contributes to an understanding of the people as such. The information presented has been selected to assist in identifying target groups, estimating their probable reactions to given situations, developing applicable techniques of persuasion, and avoiding inappropriate actions. This area handbook is not to be considered a final product, since no document can present the final word about human factors. It should rather be viewed as a point of departure for the continuous development of further information on which to base special, psychological, and unconventional warfare planning and operations. This was in Guinea in 1961. You understand? And then in the foreword to it, I'm just going to read one paragraph, Comrade Fenty. I love the way you conduct meetings. I really do. And it says in the foreword, the state's clearest and most persuasive, they say that the Republic of Guinea in late 1961 occupied a special position among the new African states, which had emerged out of the rising tide of African nationalism in the years after World War II. In September 1958, it alone of France's West African territories opted in referendum for independence outside the French community. In other words, they didn't want to be a neo-colonial state. The choice, which suddenly cut off sorely needed French technical and material assistance, established Guinea in polar position in African nationalism, for which it continues to be a principal spokesman. The new state's clearest and most persuasive voice is that of its president, Sékou Touré, who is also head of the sole political party. The principles he proclaims for Africa and undeveloped areas generally are unqualified rejection of all vestiges of colonial control, alertness against what he sees as the threat of neo-colonial domination by the Western powers employing economic means, positive neutralism in the Cold War, and a doctrine of popular dictatorship and socialist economic organization. Guinea projects for Africa a sovereign unity of states infused with these principles. You know, Guinea projects for Africa a sovereign unity of states infused with these principles, and it has joined with Ghana and Mali in establishing the former nucleus of such a union. This is why they had a plan to destroy Guinea, because it was struggling for a unified Africa, and it was opposed to neo-colonial and domination by white power. And because it was working with Nkrumah in Ghana and with the comrade Modibo in Mali. This is why. If you look at what's happening in Africa today, it's because white power makes plans for your ass every day like this. I don't know how many pages this is, and this is just one document from one university. They planning on us all the time, and that's why we cannot have movements based on superstitions, ooga-boogaism, nonsense, but we have to build an organization based on revolutionary principles that adhere to an understanding of the laws of society itself. We do this, we will win. That's why we're having this cadre intensive now. Uhuru.